The rain came down so hard that night it seemed determined to erase every light on the lonely road. Emma Carter tightened her hands around the steering wheel and slowed her old sedan as the windshield wipers struggled to keep up. She was a 32-year-old single mother, exhausted after a long shift at the diner, with her 6-year-old daughter Lily asleep beneath a small blanket in the back seat. Emma was already thinking about getting home, warming some milk for Lily, and finally resting her tired feet. Then she saw him. An elderly man was walking alone along the side of the road, completely soaked, his gray hair plastered against his forehead. He carried a worn leather briefcase in one hand and held his coat tightly around himself with the other. Emma passed him, but something inside her refused to let her continue. She looked into the rearview mirror and saw the old man stumble near a puddle. She immediately pulled over. "Mummy, why did we stop?" Lily asked sleepily. Emma looked back at her daughter and smiled gently. "Because someone needs help, sweetheart." She stepped out in the rain and called toward the man.
"Sir, are you okay?"
The old man turned slowly. His face looked tired, embarrassed, and almost defeated. "I'm fine," he called back, though his trembling voice said otherwise. Emma walked closer. "You're freezing. Where are you going?" The man hesitated. "I was supposed to meet someone at the bus station, but I missed the last bus." Emma glanced toward the empty road. There was no taxi, no nearby house, and no other car in sight. "Get in," she said. The old man stared at her. "What?" Emma opened the passenger door. "I'll take you home." He shook his head quickly. No. I couldn't ask a stranger to do that." Emma smiled. "You didn't ask me. I offered." For a moment, the old man simply stood there as rain poured over his shoulders. Then he slowly walked toward the car. Before getting in, he looked at Emma with tears mixing with rain on his face. "Young lady, you have no idea what this means." Emma simply replied, "Maybe I don't. But I know nobody should be left alone in weather like this." The old man climbed inside. Lily woke fully and looked at him from the back seat. "Are you cold?" she asked innocently. The man smiled for the first time that night. "Little." Lily pulled her blanket away from herself. "You can have half." Emma glanced at the mirror and saw the old man staring at the little girl in disbelief. "Thank you," he whispered. Emma drove through the storm, listening as the old man slowly revealed that his name was Walter Bennett. He had been trying to reach a small cottage outside town after a difficult day at the hospital. Emma did not ask too many questions. She simply listened. When they finally reached his modest home, Walter held the door handle but did not immediately leave. "May I ask your name?" he said. "Emma." He nodded slowly. "Emma, I won't forget tonight." She smiled. "You don't have to remember me. Just get inside and stay warm." Walter stepped into the rain, then turned once more. "I think you may have just reminded me that good people still exist." Emma watched until he disappeared behind his front door. She had no idea that by sunrise, someone would be standing outside her own house, waiting to tell her that the old man she helped was not who she thought he was. If you believe one small act of kindness can change a life, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because what happened the next morning would change Emma's life forever. Emma barely slept that night. Lily had developed a slight cough, and the storm continued until almost 3 in the morning. By sunrise, the streets were covered in puddles and fallen branches. Emma made breakfast while Lily sat at the kitchen table coloring a picture of 3 people standing beneath an umbrella. "Who are they?" Emma asked. Lily smiled. "Me, you, and the grandpa from the rain." Emma laughed softly. "You mean Mr. Walter?" Lily nodded. He looked lonely. Emma stopped for a moment. Those words stayed with her. She had spent years believing that loneliness was something only she understood. Since her husband had left when Lily was 2, Emma had worked 2 jobs, paid every bill herself, and learned to hide exhaustion behind a smile. She had never considered that an elderly stranger could carry his own invisible pain. Around 8 that morning, someone knocked on the door. Emma wiped her hands and opened it. A tall man in his late 30s stood on the porch wearing a dark suit. His expression was serious, but his eyes looked unusually tired. "Are you Emma Carter?" he asked.
Emma became cautious. "Yes."
"Who are you?" The man took a breath. "My name is Daniel Bennett." Emma froze. "Bennett?" The old man from the night before. Daniel looked past her toward the living room. "I'm Walter Bennett's son." Emma immediately relaxed. "Is your father okay?" Daniel nodded. "He's fine. Better than fine, actually. But he insisted that I come here." Emma looked confused. "Why?" Daniel reached into his coat and removed a small envelope. "He gave me this." Emma took it. Inside was a handwritten note. Walter had written, "To the woman who stopped when everyone else kept driving." Emma's eyes filled with tears. Daniel continued, "My father doesn't usually accept help. He's always been proud. Last night, when I finally reached him, he told me something I haven't heard from him in years." Emma looked up. "What did he say?" Daniel's voice softened. "He said he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be treated like a human being instead of a burden." Emma swallowed hard. Daniel looked toward Lily, who was watching them from the hallway. "He also told me about your daughter." Emma smiled. Lily gave him half her blanket. Daniel smiled faintly. "My father said that was the most valuable thing anyone had given him in years." Emma did not know what to say. She expected perhaps a thank you, maybe a gift, and then the man would leave. Instead, Daniel asked, "May I come inside?" Emma hesitated before opening the door wider. Daniel entered and sat at the kitchen table. He explained that Walter had been at the hospital because he had recently undergone a series of tests after feeling weak. He was not seriously ill, but the experience had frightened him. Daniel had been traveling for work and had not realized how isolated his father had become. "I thought he had everything," Daniel admitted. "A house, money, people who worked for him. But last night he told me he had everything except someone who would stop." Emma looked down. "I didn't do anything special." Daniel shook his head. "That's exactly why it was special." Then he noticed the old refrigerator, the worn kitchen cabinets, and the small stack of unpaid bills Emma had tried to hide beneath a grocery receipt. He didn't comment. Instead, he asked about Lily. Emma told him about her daughter's school and how she worked evenings to keep their lives together. Daniel listened carefully. "Before leaving," he said, "My father wants you to come to dinner tonight." Emma immediately shook her head. "That's not necessary." Daniel smiled. He didn't ask. He insisted. Emma watched him walk toward his car. She had no idea that Daniel's visit wasn't simply a thank you. He had noticed something about Emma that reminded him of his father. She was carrying more than she ever admitted. And Walter had already made a decision that could change everything. That evening, Emma arrived at Walter Bennett's house with Lily holding her hand. She almost turned around twice before reaching the front door. The house was much larger than she had expected, with tall windows, polished floors, and expensive furniture. Emma felt uncomfortable immediately. She whispered to Lily, "Remember your manners." Lily nodded seriously. Walter appeared from the hallway wearing a clean sweater and smiling warmly.
There she is!
He exclaimed. "The woman who rescued me." Emma laughed. "I only gave you a ride." Walter shook his head. "Sometimes a ride is more than a ride." He bent down and hugged Lily, who immediately asked whether he had gotten warm. Walter laughed. "Because of you, young lady, I did." Dinner was simple despite the impressive house. Walter insisted on serving Emma himself, which made her nervous. Daniel sat across from her, watching quietly. As they ate, Walter told stories about his younger years. He had built a small transportation company from nothing and eventually turned it into a successful business. But success had cost him something. His wife had died several years earlier, and Daniel had spent most of his adult life traveling because their relationship had become strained. "Money can solve many problems," Walter said quietly. "But it cannot buy back time." Emma listened. She understood that sentence more than she wanted to admit. After dinner, Walter asked Emma to walk with him into his study. He opened a drawer and removed an old photograph of himself, Daniel, and a woman Emma assumed was Daniel's mother. "This was taken before everything changed," Walter said. "Before I became too busy. Before I started thinking providing money was the same as providing love." Emma studied the photograph. "You regret it?" Walter nodded. "Every day." He then looked directly at her. "When you stopped for me last night, I realized something. I spent years building a company so nobody would ever have to struggle. Yet I never noticed the people struggling right in front of me." Emma felt uncomfortable. "Mr. Bennett, I don't need anything." Walter smiled.
I know.
He opened another folder. Inside was information about a small community center his company owned near Emma's neighborhood. It had been closed for years. "I want to reopen it," he said. "A place where single parents, elderly people, and struggling families can find food, job training, tutoring, and temporary assistance." Emma stared at him. "That's wonderful." Walter shook his head. "I want you to run it." Emma almost laughed. "Me? You know what people need because you've lived it." Daniel finally spoke. "Dad has been planning this for months, but he never found the right person." Emma looked between them. "I don't have management experience." Daniel smiled. You manage a household, raise a child, work 2 jobs, and somehow still stop for a stranger in a storm. I think you understand responsibility better than most executives. Emma's eyes filled with tears. But she still hesitated. Why me? Walter answered softly. Because I don't want this center built by someone who only understands poverty from a report. I want someone who understands dignity. Emma looked at Lily, who was sitting nearby drawing again. She thought about all the nights she had counted coins at the kitchen table. She remembered choosing between groceries and a utility bill. She remembered how humiliating it felt to ask for help. Then she looked at Walter. If I accept, I don't want people treated like charity cases. Walter smiled. That's exactly why I chose you. Emma accepted. Over the following weeks, Daniel worked beside her as they renovated the center. Their friendship slowly grew into something neither expected. Daniel discovered that Emma made him laugh. Emma discovered that behind Daniel's serious expression was a man who had spent years wishing his father would simply tell him he was proud. One afternoon, Walter watched them from across the room and smiled. He knew the greatest gift from that rainy night wasn't the center. It was the family he had unknowingly helped bring together. 6 months later, the old community center reopened. The walls were freshly painted, shelves were filled with donated food, children gathered for tutoring, and elderly neighbors came for warm meals and conversation. Emma stood near the entrance watching everything happen. She still couldn't believe how much had changed. She was no longer working 2 exhausting jobs. She still worked hard, but now she had a purpose that reached beyond simply surviving. Lily spent afternoons at the center doing homework and helping elderly visitors carry their bags. Walter came almost every day, pretending he was there to inspect the building when everyone knew he simply enjoyed being around people again. Daniel became involved too. He reduced his business travel and started helping with the center's finances. Slowly, the relationship between him and his father healed. One evening, Emma found Walter sitting alone on the front steps. She sat beside him. You okay? She asked. Walter smiled. I've been thinking about that rainy night. Emma laughed. You still talk about it. Because that night changed my life, he said. But I don't think you understand how much. He explained that before Emma found him, he had been sitting alone in a hospital room after receiving frightening medical news. He had spent years surrounded by employees, lawyers, and business associates, but he had never felt more alone. He had planned to return home and continue living exactly as before. Then Emma stopped. You gave me something I couldn't buy, he said. You reminded me that I mattered to someone who didn't even know my name. Emma wiped away a tear. And you gave people here something they needed too. Walter shook his head. No, you did. I only opened a door. You taught everyone how to walk through it with dignity. Daniel appeared behind them carrying 2 cups of coffee. Dad, you're getting sentimental again. Walter laughed. I'm old. I'm allowed. Daniel handed Emma a cup. Then he looked at her with an expression she had come to recognize. Emma, can I ask you something? She nodded. Daniel took a breath. Would you and Lily have dinner with me tonight? Emma smiled. You mean dinner as friends? Daniel smiled back. I was hoping for something more than friends. Emma looked toward Lily, who was watching from inside the center. Lily immediately gave her an enthusiastic thumbs up. Emma laughed. I think we can arrange that. Walter pretended to wipe away a tear. Finally, everyone laughed. But the most emotional moment came later that night when Walter handed Emma a small wooden box. Inside was a simple key. What's this? She asked. Walter pointed toward a new door beside the community center. That office is yours. This place belongs to the community, but that room belongs to the person who made it possible. Emma stared at the key. I don't know what to say. Walter smiled. You don't need to say anything. Just keep stopping when you see someone who needs help. Years later, people would still tell the story of the rainy night when a single mother stopped her old car for a stranger. They would talk about the center that changed hundreds of lives. They would talk about Daniel and Emma finding when neither expected it. But Emma always remembered something simpler. She remembered a lonely old man standing in the rain, carrying nothing but a briefcase and a broken spirit. She remembered opening her car door and saying, Get in, I'll take you home. She thought she was giving him a ride. She never realized she was helping him find his way back to life. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Kindness doesn't always return in the form you expect. Sometimes you give someone warmth, and years later, you discover that the warmth came back to you. So if this story touched your heart, Please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about kindness, humanity, love, and second chances. Because sometimes, one small decision on an ordinary night can change more lives than we will ever know.